Hey everyone, Richard here. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about creating a plan and understanding that there are stages to a drawing and knowing or recognizing when it is that we're going from one stage to the next. One thing I see a lot of people doing is they're trying to do too many things. This applies more to beginners than anything else, but they're basically trying to do too many things all at once. So you'll find someone trying to do gesture, but they're also trying to add tone, or they're trying to bring something to the drawing which the drawing is simply not ready for. So what I like to do is I like to create what will ultimately be a repeatable process. So no matter what the pose is, there are some exceptions, like heavily foreshortened, for example. I might want to shift around the order in which I do things slightly, but I want a process that I can bring to pretty much every pose and hit sequentially. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll see that I inevitably start all my drawings the same way, as we've discussed before, finding that large relationship between the upper and the lower torso. For me, that tells me the most about the pose, the most about the drawing, and so it's a very logical place for me to start. But I like to divide things basically up into approximately 3 sections. So the first section, which we're working on right now, we're working very lightly. We're essentially looking at things like gesture, proportion, measurement. This is the time to make adjustments to those things. As I said, we're working lightly. We can push things, we can pull things, and it's not really going to affect the outcome of the final image if we make these adjustments at this point. I see a lot of people get 3/4 of the way into a drawing and then realize that the legs are too long or the arms are too short, whatever it might be, and it's going to be nearly impossible at that stage to make the adjustments needed. So understanding that we have stages, and as I said, this first stage, looking at getting down all the large ideas, and I'm working diagrammatically. What does that mean? It essentially means that I'm describing form and mass with line as opposed to with tone. So I've gone in, I've got all the large ideas down. Now I'm going in and I'm starting to commit to those ideas. And now's when I really kind of shift gears and I start thinking about design language, which I wasn't concerning myself too much with in the previous stage. The previous stage was about volume and mass and pose and all of that kind of thing. But now I'm thinking, what is the relationship between, for example, the top of that forearm and the bottom of that forearm? I've got a straight on the top. I've got a curve on the bottom. For me, in my design language, I find that those shapes work very well off each other. They bring dynamics to the drawing. So when I'm working at this stage, I'm really concerning myself now more about subtleties, and also using this stage to show more subtle ideas of anatomy. Little things here and there where I'll go away from what I did at the gestural stage, just to try and push to show a little piece of anatomy where form's turning, or where there's surface anatomy where we've got a joint, for example, where bones are coming to the surface of the form. So I'm understanding that I'm working in stages, and so it gives me an opportunity to collect my thoughts and really be able to go through methodically and say, okay, the gestural stage is done now. The measurement stage is completely finished. Now I'm getting into subtlety, and I can work on those subtleties with a certain amount of confidence that if I'm satisfied with what I did in the first stage, I don't need to be thinking about measurement anymore in the same way that I was in the first stage, right? Okay, so we're still at the diagrammatical stage, but this is what I'm doing right now is I'm essentially laying in core shadow. Now, the core shadow is the precursor to the final tone that will be in the drawing, but I've done drawings where I've added this core shadow stage and then stopped the drawing, because what the core shadow does is it shows volume, obviously. Well, what it does is it shows where a form is turning in space, going from the lit side of the form into the shadow side of the form. And it's also showing anatomy. So something that may not have really described form in the diagrammatical stage before the core shadow can help describe that form in a more succinct way and help bring us what will ultimately be to the next stage, which is, once all of my core shadow is done, now I can go in and start filling in the tone. I don't fill in tone before I get all of my core shadow down. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's a term for that which is called shadow mapping. That's essentially what you're doing, is you're mapping what's in shadow and what's in light. You should be able to squint at a drawing and get a very clear idea of what is in shadow and what is in light. What I see happen a lot is people will see in the reference or on the model, they'll see a lot of different light changes in the shadow part of the form, and they'll try and describe all of those ideas. Now look, there's a place for reflected or bounced light in the shadow side of the form, absolutely. But at its core, there should just be what is in light, what is in shadow. Then you can go in and you can hit subtleties or refinements of both sides. I would say this as a general rule: keep the detail in one side of the form. In this drawing like this, for example, most of the detail is in the lit side of the form, and the shadow acts as a kind of a cushion for that idea to sit on. If you try and give equal detail and equal attention to both the lit and the shadow side of the form, you're going to end up with just way too much noise in the drawing. It really is, with light and shadow, it's about less is more. Keep your shapes simple and to the point. So what I'd like to do now is just look at these three stages next to each other. So obviously we have the diagrammatical stage. Then we have our core shadow added to the diagrammatical stage. And as you can see, we could stop at that point. And then we have the tone and all the potential drama that you could bring to the pose with light and shadow. So if you can break down, understand when it is that you're in what stage of the drawing you're at, and when you're transitioning to the next stage, it will really help give you a formulation for how to proceed with the drawing. So I hope that helps. I'm going to try and do a lot more with each one of these subjects and go into it in more depth. But for now, hopefully that will do it. So I'll see you all very soon. Take care.